This 4-year-old beggar girl finds a millionaire inside a hole full of frogs. But when she tries to pull him out, she falls in too, and something terrible happens. Watch until the end, you won't regret it. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The midday sun beat down on the dusty streets of Harmony Creek, a small town nestled in rural West Virginia, where time seemed to have stood still since the 1980s. Among the simple clapboard houses and stores with faded facades, a small, frail figure moved like a shadow in search of survival. Zara was only 4 years old, but her big, dark eyes carried a sadness that shouldn't exist in such a young child. Her tangled brown hair, matted with dirt, fell over a thin face marked by constant hunger. The faded pink t-shirt, 3 sizes, too big for her fragile body, had been found in the dumpster in the town square a few weeks ago. Her bare feet knew every loose stone, every crack in the uneven sidewalks of the town. On that sweltering afternoon in January, Zara walked along Elm Street, where the simplest houses in the neighborhood were located, rummaging through trash cans in search of something edible. Her stomach ached so much that she could barely concentrate. It had been 2 days since she had eaten anything other than a few fallen apples in the churchyard. That's when she heard the scream. A desperate sound, filled with pure panic, echoed through the vacant lots near the Old Town Reservoir. Zara stopped immediately, her head turning in the direction of the sound like an animal on alert. It was an adult cry, male, coming from somewhere. Beyond the houses, where the abandoned fields began, driven by a natural curiosity that still resisted the adversities of her life, Zara followed the direction of the screams. Her small feet found a narrow path that snaked between dried bushes and sparse trees. The terrain was uneven, full of holes and depressions left by the torrential rains of the previous year. The screams intensified, mixed now with strange sounds that she could not identify. They sounded like hops, as if hundreds of small objects were hitting the ground repeatedly. Zara quickened her pace, her breathing becoming heavier due to the scorching heat. When she reached the top of a small rise, she saw it. At the bottom of a deep hole, about 10 feet wide and 6 feet deep, was a man completely covered in dark mud. But it wasn't just the mud that shocked her. Around him, jumping, hopping, and croaking in a deafening chorus, were hundreds of frogs of all sizes. Small green frogs, larger brown frogs, all seemingly attracted to the man struggling at the bottom of the hole like a trapped animal. The man was clearly rich. Even covered in mud from head to toe, Zara could see the remains of an expensive suit, a silk tie, and fine leather shoes. His graying hair was plastered to his dirty face, and his blue eyes conveyed absolute terror as he tried to protect himself from the amphibians that kept jumping on him. "Please, someone help me!" the man shouted, his voice choked with despair. "Get these things off me, please!" Zara approached the edge of the hole, fascinated by the bizarre scene. The man saw her, and his eyes lit up with desperate hope. Girl, help me. I'll pay you anything you want. Just get me out of here." Theodore Ted Mansour, at 58, was known throughout the region as the owner of the largest chain of hardware stores in rural West Virginia. His fortune had been built over decades of hard work and shrewd negotiations. He owned 3 stores in the area, a mansion in downtown Harmony Creek, and a reputation as a serious and successful man. But at that moment, he was just a man, terrified by his deepest phobia. Since childhood, Ted had been terrified of amphibians. The mere sight of a small frog was enough to make him sweat and lose control. And now he was surrounded by hundreds of them, trapped in a hole from which he could not escape. Zara observed the situation with the seriousness of someone much older. She could feel the man's genuine fear, and something inside her, a natural kindness that poverty had not managed to extinguish, compelled her to help. "Hold on, mister," she said in her childish but determined voice. "I'll get a big branch for you to hold on to." Zara ran to a nearby tree and broke off a sturdy branch about 5 feet long. She ran back to the edge of the hole and positioned herself carefully, extending the branch down. "Hold on here!" she shouted. Ted tried to reach the branch, but the distance was too great, and the mud made any movement difficult. The frogs continued to jump on him, and with each touch of their cold, damp feet, the businessman screamed as if he were being tortured. Zara tried to lean further forward, stretching the branch as far as possible. That's when she lost her balance. With a cry of surprise, she slipped on the loose soil at the edge of the hole and tumbled down, falling directly into the mud next to Ted. The impact made her dizzy for a few seconds, but when she recovered, she realized the gravity of the situation. Now, there were 2 people trapped in the hole, and the frogs seemed even more agitated by the arrival of the new company. The cold, smelly mud rose to Zara's waist as she landed at the bottom of the hole. The initial shock gave way to a strange calm as she watched Ted struggling beside her, completely overwhelmed by panic. The frogs continued to jump between them, some landing on the shoulders and heads of the 2 unlikely prisoners. "Calm down, mister," Zara said, her childish voice contrasting with the serenity she demonstrated. "They won't hurt us. They're just little frogs looking for a cool place." Ted looked at the girl as if she were an apparition. How could a 4-year-old be so calm in such a desperate situation? "You don't understand," he shouted, trying to get away from a particularly large frog that had landed on his shoulder. They're going to what?" Zara asked, genuinely curious. She held out her small hand and let a small green frog settle in her palm. "Look how cute it is. It has really round eyes." The apparent ease with which the girl handled the amphibians left Ted even more disturbed. He had tried to climb the walls of the hole several times, but the slippery mud made any attempt impossible. His manicured hands, accustomed only to shaking hands in business meetings and signing contracts, were bleeding where he had tried to grab onto the roots hanging from the edges. "How can you touch those things?" he asked, his voice trembling. Zara shrugged, a surprisingly mature gesture for her age. "My Grandma Betty always said that critters can tell when you're scared. If you ain't scared, they stay tame." Ted tried to process this simple information, but his phobia was stronger than any logic. Betty. He vaguely registered the name, but he was too busy trying not to panic completely. Hours passed slowly. The sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange. Zara had settled into a corner of the hole where there was less mud, humming softly a ditty she had learned from her grandmother. The simple and repetitive melody seemed to have a magical effect on the frogs, which gradually calmed down. "Little frog by the river's edge, when the frog croaks, honey, it's 'cause he's cold," she sang softly, her voice echoing off the walls of the hole. To Ted's surprise, the frogs really seemed to respond to the music. Many stopped jumping and settled in the mud, just watching the girl with their big, bright eyes. Some even seemed to follow the rhythm of the song with small movements of their heads. "How do you do that?" Ted murmured, fascinated despite his terror. "Grandma said all critters like music," Zara explained. "She sang to the chickens to lay more eggs, to the cows to give more milk. It always worked." Ted found himself listening intently as Zara told him about her grandmother. Betty had raised the girl since she was a baby, after her mother disappeared. They lived in a small shack on the outskirts of town, surviving on small jobs that her grandmother managed to get on the local farms. But a few months ago, Betty had left to work on a distant farm, promising to return soon with enough money to improve their lives. "She ain't back yet," Zara said with a sadness that tugged at Ted's heart, "but I know she's coming back. She promised." As night fell, the cold began to set in. Zara began to shiver, her thin body offering little protection against the icy dampness of the hole. Ted, despite his aversion to physical contact under normal circumstances, found himself moved by a protective instinct he didn't know he possessed. "Come here, girl," he said softly. "Let's keep each other warm." Zara snuggled up next to the businessman, and he wrapped her with his muddy jacket. It was a surreal moment, the richest man in the region sharing body heat with a street girl at the bottom of a hole full of frogs. "What's your name?" Ted asked. "Zara," she replied, yawning. "And yours?" "Ted. Ted Mansour." Zara's eyes widened. Even as a street child, she had heard of the famous businessman. "You're the owner of the big stores?" "I am," he confirmed, feeling a strange shame as he admitted his wealth to this child who clearly had nothing. "Why were you here in the hole?" Zara asked, her childish curiosity overcoming any intimidation she might feel. Ted hesitated. The truth was embarrassing. He had come to check out a piece of land he was considering buying to expand his business. He had been so absorbed in examining the documents on his cell phone that he didn't pay attention to where he was walking. When he realized it, he had stepped wrong and fallen directly into the hole, which apparently was an old well or abandoned cistern. "I was working," he said, vaguely. Zara nodded as if that was perfectly normal. "Grandma always said work is important. She worked hard on the farms." During the night, Zara continued to sing softly whenever the frogs stirred. Her simple ditties, old folk songs that Betty had taught her, had an almost hypnotic power over the amphibians. Ted, who had spent his whole life avoiding any contact with these animals, gradually found himself relaxing in their presence. "Aren't you afraid of anything?" he asked in a moment of silence. Zara thought carefully before answering. "I'm afraid of being alone forever. I'm afraid of never seeing Grandma again, but of little frogs. Nah." The brutal simplicity of the answer left Ted speechless. Here was a child facing real and terrible fears daily, while he, a successful adult, was paralyzed by an irrational phobia. When the sun rose on the second day, the two were covered in dry mud and exhausted. Zara had transformed the desperate situation into a strange adventure, inventing stories about the frogs being enchanted princes, guarding secret treasures at the bottom of the hole. Her fertile imagination and tireless optimism kept both her and Ted mentally stable during the long hours of waiting. "Is someone going to look for us?" Zara asked, looking up through the opening of the hole. Ted thought of his wife Vivian, who was probably furious about his disappearance. He thought of his employees, his business responsibilities, but looking at Zara, he realized that no one was probably looking for her. "Yes," he said with determination, "someone will find us." That's when they heard distant voices approaching. The voices approached slowly, accompanied by the sound of heavy footsteps on the dry vegetation. Ted and Zara looked up hopefully at the opening of the hole, where three figures finally appeared, silhouetted against the blue morning sky. "Good heavens, there are people down here!" shouted a middle-aged man wearing simple work clothes. It was Jake, one of the employees of the neighboring farm, who had gone out early to check the fences when he heard strange sounds coming from the abandoned land. "Hold on, folks, we'll get you out of there," said another man, younger, while looking for something he could use as a rope. "Is there a kid down there too?" "Yes, a little girl," replied Ted, his voice hoarse after hours of shouting for help. Please, get her out first." The farm workers quickly organized an improvised rescue. Jake ran to his truck and returned with a sturdy sisal rope. In a few minutes, Zara was being carefully hoisted out of the hole, her big eyes watching everything, with curiosity instead of the trauma that any normal child should feel. When it was Ted's turn, he was so weak that he could barely hold onto the rope. The 2 days without adequate food, dehydration, and constant stress had taken their toll. The men needed to make a considerable effort to pull him up. "Mr. Mansour!" exclaimed Jake when he finally recognized the businessman covered in mud. "You're the owner of Mansour's stores. Everyone has been looking for you for 2 days." Ted tried to regain his dignity, but his appearance was pathetic, completely covered in dry mud, with his expensive suit in tatters and his hair disheveled. He looked more like a beggar than a respected businessman. "The girl," he murmured, searching for Zara with his eyes. "Where's the girl?" Zara was sitting a few feet away, being examined by the third man, who was trying to determine if she was injured. Even dirty and clearly malnourished, she smiled at the strangers with a sweetness that deeply touched the hearts of the workers. "She's okay, sir," the man said. "Too skinny, but doesn't seem hurt. Who is this child?" Ted looked at Zara and felt something strange stir in his chest. During those terrible hours in the hole, she had been his only company, his anchor against total despair. Her courage, her kindness, her ability to find beauty even in the most desperate situation, all of this had impacted the businessman in a way he couldn't explain. She helped me," he said simply. "If it wasn't for her, I would have gone crazy down there." The workers exchanged meaningful glances. It was common to find abandoned children in the region, but they rarely saw one so young, surviving alone. "We'll take you to town," said Jake. "You need medical attention, and the girl—" "The girl is coming with me," Ted interrupted, surprising himself with the firmness of the statement. "She's coming to my house." During the drive back to Harmony Creek in Jake's truck, Ted watched Zara sitting next to him in the back seat. She looked out the window with fascination, pointing to cows, horses, and landscapes that seemed new to her. It was as if she had never left the poorest limits of the town. "Look, Ted, what a pretty house!" she exclaimed, pointing to a farm with a well-maintained farmhouse. The naturalness with which she pronounced his name, without any formality, made him smile. Ted began to think about the implications of his impulsive decision. His wife, Vivian, would not react well to the unexpected arrival of a street child in their home. The Mansour mansion was known for its elegance and impeccable order, a reflection of the social status that Vivian so prized. Vivian Mansour, at 52, came from one of the most traditional families in Harmony Creek. Her father had been mayor for 3 terms, and she grew up accustomed to being treated with deference and respect. She had married Ted when he was still building his business empire, attracted both by his ambition and his ability to maintain her in the standard of living to which she was accustomed. When the truck stopped in front of the ornate gates of the Mansour mansion, Zara gasped. The house was a 2-story manor, painted white with gold trim, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens. A marble fountain decorated the center of the entrance courtyard, and towering palm trees lined the driveway leading to the main door. "Do you live here?" Zara asked, her eyes wide with admiration. "I do," replied Ted, beginning to feel nervous about how he would explain the situation to his wife. Dulce, the family housekeeper for 20 years, was the first to see them arriving. At 45, she had dedicated much of her adult life to caring for the Mansour home. She was a robust woman, her hair tied in a bun, who commanded the other employees with military efficiency. "Mr. Mansour," she cried, running through the garden. "Thank goodness you're alive. Mrs. Mansour is desperate. The police, the fire department, everyone is looking for you." Dulcie stopped abruptly when she saw Zara. Her experienced eyes quickly assessed the situation. The boss covered in mud, accompanied by a child clearly in a situation of homelessness. "Dulcie, prepare a room for the girl," said Ted, trying to regain his usual authority. "She will be staying with us for some time." "Sir?" asked Dulcie, confused. "But I'll explain everything later. Now I need a shower and clean clothes." "And so does the girl." At that moment, Vivian appeared on the porch of the house. She was elegantly dressed even at that time of the morning in a beige linen dress and discreet but expensive jewelry. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and her impeccable makeup could not completely hide the worry lines on her face. "Ted, where were you?" she cried, quickly descending the marble stairs. "I was almost calling out the National Guard to look for you." She stopped suddenly when she saw Zara. Her eyes narrowed as she assessed the dirty, ragged child accompanying her. "Husband, who is this child?" asked Vivian, her voice as cold as ice. "This is Zara," said Ted, placing his hand protectively on the girl's shoulder. "She saved my life." "How so? Saved your life? And why is she here?" Ted sighed deeply. "It's a long story, Vivian. But she's going to stay with us for a while. She needs care." Vivian's face contorted into an expression of barely disguised disgust. "Ted, did you hit your head? We can't just bring a street kid into our home." Zara, who until then had watched the exchange with curiosity, lowered her head. Even at just 4 years old, she perfectly understood the rejection in the elegant woman's tone of voice. "Vivian," said Ted, his voice carrying a tone of warning that he rarely used with his wife. "The girl stays, and that's the end of the discussion." The silence that followed was tense and loaded with implications. Vivian had never seen her husband take such a firm stand against her, especially on domestic matters. Dulce watched the scene with fascination, while Zara shrank even closer to Ted. "Very well," said Vivian finally, her voice icy. "But let it be clear that I do not agree with this, and I hope it's temporary." She turned and climbed the stairs, back to the house, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. Dulcie approached hesitantly. "Mr. Mansour, where do I put the girl?" "In the guest room upstairs," decided Ted. "And Dulcie, she'll need clothes, food, everything. Treat her as you would treat any child in the family." Dulcie nodded, although she still seemed confused by the whole situation. "Yes, sir." Ted knelt in front of Zara, who looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "Zara, this is your home now," he said softly. "I know it may seem strange, but you're going to be safe here. Dulcie will take care of you, and I'll explain to everyone how special you are." Zara nodded, but her eyes went to the windows of the house where Vivian had disappeared. "The pretty lady doesn't like me," she said with the brutal honesty of children. Ted felt his heart clench. "She just needs to get to know you better. You'll see." But even as he said those words, he knew that the battle had only just begun. Zara's first days in the Mansour mansion were a bewildering mix of wonders and humiliations. Dulce had prepared the guest room on the second floor, a spacious room with fine wooden furniture and delicate pastel wallpaper. For a child who had slept on the floor of a shack all her life, that 4-poster bed with Egyptian cotton sheets seemed like a fairy tale castle. "Is this all mine?" Zara asked on the first night, timidly touching the embroidered comforter. "It is, little one," replied Dulcie, who, despite her initial resistance, was beginning to be charmed by the girl's genuine sweetness. "And tomorrow we're going to buy you new clothes." Vivian had established strict rules from day one. Zara could not enter the main living room, could not touch the decorative objects, and certainly could not appear when there were visitors. The mansion was divided into 2 invisible zones, the spaces where Zara was tolerated and those where her presence was forbidden. "Understand one thing," Vivian said to Dulcie the next morning, while they were having coffee in the kitchen. "I don't want to see that girl when my friends come for tea. I don't want embarrassing explanations about why we have a charity case living in our house." Dulcie frowned. During her 20 years serving the family, she had learned to read between the lines of what Vivian said. "She's just a child, Mrs. Mansour, and Mr. Mansour seems very fond of her." "Exactly the problem," murmured Vivian, stirring sugar into her coffee with brusque movements. Ted is acting completely irrationally. 2 days in a hole and he completely loses his mind. Meanwhile, in the backyard of the property, something extraordinary was happening. Ted had casually mentioned that he owned an artificial ornamental pond in the back of the house, created by the previous landscaper as a decorative element. The problem was that after years of neglect, the pond had become a stagnant swamp, covered in algae and dead plants. Zara discovered the pond on the second day and was fascinated. "What a sad place," she said to Ted when he found her crouched on the edge of the murky water. "The little fish must be very sick here." "There are no fish." "Zara, it's all been dead for years." "It ain't," she insisted with the confidence of someone who possessed knowledge that adults had forgotten. "There's life down here. It just needs help to breathe." In the following days, Zara began to work on the pond with a determination that surprised all the employees of the house. Using only her small hands and branches she found in the garden, she began to remove the dead algae and rotting vegetation. She hummed her ditties while she worked, the same songs that had calmed the frogs in the hole. Carlos, the 35-year-old gardener who took care of the formal gardens of the mansion, watched her with skepticism. "Girl, that ain't got no saving. It's been like that for 5 years." "Grandma Betty always said that everything can be pretty again," replied Zara, continuing her tireless work. "It just needs love and patience." To everyone's surprise, after a week of Zara's constant work, small signs of life began to appear in the pond. The water gradually became less murky. Small aquatic insects reappeared, and some submerged plants that everyone believed to be dead began to show new green shoots. Ted watched the daily progress with growing admiration. The girl possessed a natural intuition for dealing with nature that he had never seen before. More than that, her tireless dedication and unwavering optimism began to transform not only the pond, but the entire atmosphere of the gardens. "How does she do it?" he asked Dulce one afternoon, watching Zara work on the pond. "I don't know, Mr. Mansour," replied the housekeeper, who was also gradually being won over by the girl's persistence. "But it's like she talks to the plants, and they listen." The transformation did not go unnoticed by the neighbors. The Mansour mansion was located on a street where the most influential families in Harmony Creek lived, and the gardens were visible from the sidewalk. Before long, people began to stop to observe the girl's work and comment on the remarkable changes in the landscaping. "Vivian, did you hire a new landscaper?" asked Barbara Jenkins, one of the friends in Vivian's social circle, during one of the weekly teas. "The gardens are completely transformed." Vivian almost choked on her corn muffin. How to explain that the person responsible for the transformation was the street girl her husband had brought home? Yes, a new specialist," she lied, casting a nervous glance at Dulcie. "But secrets in small towns have a short life." Soon all of Harmony Creek knew about the mysterious child who lived with the Mansours and who possessed a special gift for making gardens bloom. Speculations ran wild. Was she a distant relative, a secret granddaughter, a special protégé of the businessman? Ted initially had said that Zara would stay temporarily while they tried to locate relatives or a suitable family to adopt her. But as the days passed, he found himself increasingly reluctant to take any action in that regard. The girl's presence had brought a new energy to his life, a perspective he didn't know he was losing. "Ted, we need to talk," Vivian said one night after Zara went to sleep. They were in Ted's private library, a formal setting with bookshelves that reached the ceiling and dark leather furniture. "About what?" he asked, although he knew perfectly well what the subject would be. "About the girl. It's been 3 weeks. People are starting to ask questions I can't answer. My social position is being compromised." Ted sighed, closing the accounting book he was reading. "Vivian, she's not hurting anyone. On the contrary, look what she's done with the gardens." "The gardens are not the problem," exploded Vivian, losing her carefully maintained composure. "The problem is that we are becoming the subject of gossip in the entire town. No one understands why a respectable couple like us is raising a street girl." "And what do you suggest?" asked Ted, his voice dangerously low. "That we find a suitable family for her, people from the same social background, where she feels more comfortable." Ted stood up abruptly, walking to the window overlooking the gardens. Even in the dark, he could see the silhouette of the pond that Zara had transformed. During the day, small birds had begun to frequent the area, attracted by the clean water and the renewed plants. "You don't understand," he said finally. "That girl, she saved me, Vivian, not just physically pulled me out of the hole. She showed me things I had forgotten existed." "What things?" "Kindness without interest, courage without vanity, the ability to find beauty where everyone sees only destruction." Ted turned to face his wife. "When was the last time you did something simply because it was the right thing to do?" The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Vivian knew her husband well. She knew when he had made an unwavering decision, but she also knew her own limits. "Very well," she said coldly. "But don't expect me to treat her like a daughter. And when your business starts to suffer because of the rumors and speculation, remember that I warned you." She left the library, slamming the door, leaving Ted alone with his thoughts. He didn't know it yet, but Vivian's words about the business would prove prophetic in a way that neither of them could imagine. Upstairs, Zara was awake in her bed, watching the stars through the bedroom window. Her small but sharp ears had picked up part of the discussion downstairs. She understood more than the adults imagined, including the fact that her presence was causing problems for Ted. That night, for the first time since arriving at the mansion, Zara cried silently into the silk pillow, feeling the weight of being an unwanted child once again. The next morning brought a discovery that would completely change the course of events. Ted woke up with a strange pain in his chest, a feeling of tightness that he initially attributed to the stress of the argument with Vivian. But when he tried to get out of bed, an intense dizziness made him stagger. "Dulce!" he called, his voice weaker than normal. The housekeeper arrived running, finding her boss pale and with his forehead covered in cold sweat. "Mr. Mansour, what happened?" "I don't know. Chest pain. Difficulty breathing," he murmured, leaning on the headboard of the bed. Dulce did not hesitate. She immediately called Dr. Miller, the family doctor for over a decade. In 20 minutes, the doctor was at the mansion, examining Ted with a grave expression. "Ted, I need to be direct with you," said Dr. Miller after completing the examination. "Your symptoms suggest a serious heart condition. We need to do urgent tests at the hospital." The following hours were a whirlwind of consultations, electrocardiograms, and CAT scans. The diagnosis was devastating. Ted had developed severe cardiomyopathy, a condition that would require complex surgeries and prolonged treatments. The stress of recent years, combined with genetic predisposition, had taken its toll. "How much will it cost?" asked Ted when Dr. Miller explained the necessary treatment. "There are 3 surgeries, possibly 4. Each costs between $50,000 and $70,000, not to mention the special medications and post-operative follow-up." Ted calculated mentally. Even as a successful businessman, those amounts represented a significant percentage of his savings. And that was assuming that his business would remain stable during his treatment. When he returned home in the late afternoon, he found Zara waiting on the porch, her big eyes full of concern. "Ted, are you sick?" she asked with the typical frankness of children. "I am a little, yes," he admitted, sitting next to her on the wooden bench. "But I'm going to be okay. Grandma Betty got sick once. She made chamomile tea and got better," Zara said hopefully. "I can make it for you too." Ted smiled, despite his worry. "Thank you, little one, but this time I'm going to need doctors." That night, Vivian locked herself in the office to analyze the family's finances. What she discovered alarmed her even more. Ted's businesses, which had always seemed solid, were facing increasing pressures. Large national chains of hardware stores had arrived in the region, offering prices that the local stores could not compete with. "Ted," she said when he came down for dinner, "I need to show you something." The spreadsheets scattered on the dining room table told a worrying story. Sales at the 3 stores had fallen 30% in the last 6 months. Profits were declining rapidly, and some suppliers were already signaling that they might need to review payment terms. "How did this happen?" murmured Ted, studying the numbers. "You've been so distracted lately," said Vivian, with a thinly veiled accusatory tone. "First that obsession with new land, then this whole situation with the girl." Ted knew she was right, at least partially. He had neglected important aspects of the business, relying too much on his employees and past success. Zara's arrival had coincided with a phase in which he should have been entirely focused on protecting his business empire. "How long do we have?" he asked. "If things continue like this, 6 months, maybe 8, if we can renegotiate some debts." Exactly the period in which he would be undergoing surgeries and recovering. The irony of the situation did not go unnoticed. Upstairs, Zara had developed a peculiar nighttime routine. After everyone was asleep, she quietly went down to Ted's office and observed the papers scattered on the table. Her photographic memory absorbed every number, every document, every spreadsheet with an accuracy that would surprise any adult. The girl had learned numbers from her grandma Betty, who, despite her limited education, possessed a natural ability for calculations that helped her manage the little money they had. Zara had inherited this gift, multiplied by a sharp intelligence and an extraordinary ability to observe. On one of those nights of exploration, she noticed something strange. Some documents showed purchases of materials with different values. For the same products, cement of the same brand cost different prices in close periods, sometimes with variations of up to 40%. "Strange," she murmured to herself, her small hands organizing the papers in a way that made more sense to her. The next morning, she went to find Ted in the garden, where he usually had coffee watching the pond she had recovered. "Ted, can I ask you a question?" "Sure, little one." "Why do you buy the same cement for different prices?" Ted almost dropped his coffee cup. "How so?" Zara ran inside the house and returned with a pile of documents she had organized during the night. "Look here. In May, you bought 50 bags of cement for $15 each. In June, the same cement cost $21 a bag, but the paper says it's from the same supplier." Ted examined the documents with growing disbelief. The girl was right, not only about the cement, but about dozens of other materials. The discrepancies were all there, clear as day, but no one had noticed. "Who is taking care of these purchases?" he asked, although he knew the answer. "This paper here has Nestor's signature," said Zara, pointing to the accountant's initials. "Is he your friend?" Nestor Silva, 41, had been the accountant responsible for the store's finances for 5 years. Ted had always trusted him implicitly, considering him almost a member of the family. The possibility that Nestor was stealing was unthinkable. "Zara, are you sure these numbers are right?" asked Ted. "I am. Grandma taught me that numbers don't lie." Ted spent the rest of the morning checking the girl's calculations. To his horror, she was absolutely correct. The discrepancies amounted to thousands of dollars per month, extending throughout the period in which Nestor was responsible for purchases. "Dulcie," he called, "prepare lunch earlier today. I need to go to the office." When Ted arrived at Mansour's stores that afternoon, he found Nestor working normally in his office, surrounded by computers and piles of documents. The accountant was a thin, bespectacled man who had always conveyed an image of seriousness and competence. "Nestor, I need to talk to you about some discrepancies in purchase prices," said Ted, placing the documents organized by Zara on the table. Nestor's face turned pale instantly. "What kind of discrepancies?" "The kind that shows that we've been paying 40% more for basic materials for 5 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Nestor tried to explain, inventing excuses about market fluctuations and different suppliers, but the evidence was too overwhelming. "How much?" asked Ted finally, his voice laden with deep disappointment. "Ted, I can explain." "How much did you steal from me?" Nestor broke down. Between tears and disjointed confessions, he revealed that he had embezzled more than $200,000 over the years, creating fictitious suppliers and overbilling purchases. The money had been used to cover gambling debts and sustain a standard of living that his salary did not allow. "I was going to return everything, Ted. I swear I was. I just needed more time." Ted listened to the confession in silence, feeling as if one of the pillars of his life was collapsing. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal of someone he had trusted blindly. At a time when he most needed stability, he discovered that he had been being robbed for years. "You're fired," he said finally, "and I'm going to prosecute you criminally." When he returned home that night, Ted was devastated. The discovery of the theft, combined with the medical diagnosis and the crisis in the business, created a scenario of almost total despair. He found Zara in the garden, tending to some seedlings she had planted near the pond. "Ted, how was your day?" He looked at that girl who had discovered in one night what it had taken him years to realize. "It was difficult, little one." "Was Nestor really stealing?" she asked, with the penetrating intuition that always surprised him. "He was." Zara nodded as if that were just another fact of life. "Grandma always said that people who lie have nervous eyes. Nestor had nervous eyes." That night, as Ted tried to process everything that had happened, a question wouldn't leave him alone. How had a 4-year-old girl managed to detect a theft scheme that had gone unnoticed by him for years? Nestor's dismissal created an administrative chaos in Mansour's stores that Ted was not prepared to face in his deteriorating health. For a week, he tried to manage the financial operations alone, but the heart medication made him dizzy and had difficulty concentrating. "I need to hire another accountant urgently," he said to Vivian one morning, after spending 2 hours trying to decipher spreadsheets that previously seemed simple. "With what money?" she retorted, examining the family's personal accounts. "Between the medical expenses to come and the money that Nestor stole, we barely have reserves for the next 3 months. It was at that moment that Zara appeared in the room, carrying a tray with herbal tea that she had prepared in the kitchen. "Dulce said this is good for the heart," she announced, offering the steaming cup to Ted. "Thank you, little one," he said, accepting the tea more out of affection than out of belief in its medicinal properties. Zara watched the papers scattered on the table with interest. "Are you trying to organize the accounts?" "We're trying to figure out how to survive," murmured Vivian bitterly. "Can I help?" Zara asked simply. Vivian let out a dry laugh. "A 4-year-old can't—" "Let her try," interrupted Ted, remembering how Zara had detected Nestor's irregularities. "What do you see here, Zara?" The girl approached the table and began to examine the documents with the same seriousness as a professional auditor. Her small eyes scanned numbers and spreadsheets with impressive speed, her photographic memory absorbing every detail. "You're buying a lot of stuff you don't need," she said after a few minutes. And some people are charging too much for simple things." "How so?" asked Ted, intrigued. Zara began to separate the papers into different piles. "Look here. You buy small screws for $10 a box from this store, but this other store sells the same screws for $6, and you buy 50 boxes a month." Ted checked the documents. She was right again. "What else? You buy too much paint. Look at the numbers from last year. In January you sold 100 cans of white paint. You bought 150. In February you sold 80. You bought 140. There's always paint left in stock." Over the next 2 hours, Zara continued her improvised analysis, identifying waste, overpriced suppliers, and unnecessary purchases that were sucking the money out of the stores. Her ability to see patterns in the numbers was extraordinary. "If you change these things here," she said, creating a separate pile of documents, "you'll save a lot of money every month." Ted quickly calculated the savings suggested by Zara. If implemented, they would represent a cost reduction of almost $30,000 per month, enough money to keep operations stable during his treatment. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, genuinely impressed. "Grandma Betty always said that when you have little money, you need to know where every penny goes. She taught me to look at the numbers and see where the problems are." Vivian, who had watched the entire demonstration in silence, finally spoke. "This is impressive, but she's just a child. She can't be responsible for business decisions." "I'm not asking her to make decisions," said Ted, "but her observations are valuable. Maybe I should spend more time analyzing the details instead of blindly trusting other people." That afternoon, Ted implemented some of Zara's suggestions, starting with changing the suppliers she had identified as expensive. To his surprise, many of the cheaper suppliers offered products of equal or superior quality. "How does this girl manage to see things that our accountants don't see?" asked Robert, the manager of the main store, when Ted explained the changes. "Maybe because she looks with fresh eyes," replied Ted, "without prejudice or old habits." Meanwhile, at the mansion, an even more disturbing discovery was being made. Dulcie, while organizing Ted's personal files for the doctors, found an old folder with documents from dismissed employees. Among them was a record that made her freeze. Isadora Santos, 22 years old, cleaner, dismissed in March 2018 for excessive absences during pregnancy. The surname Santos was the same that Zara used when introducing herself. Dulcie vaguely remembered a young, pregnant employee who had worked briefly at the main store. A quiet girl, always worried, who had been fired when her absences became frequent. Could she be Zara's mother? Dulcie murmured to herself. She decided to investigate discreetly. On Isadora's record there was an old address in the suburbs of Harmony Creek. Dulcie knew the area, a set of shacks and simple houses where the poorest population of the town lived. The next day, during her day off, Dulcie visited the address. The house had been demolished 2 years ago to make way for a housing complex, but the neighbors still remembered Isadora. "Pretty girl, that Isadora," said an elderly lady who lived on the street. "She raised the girl alone after the father disappeared. She worked in several places to support the two. And what happened to them?" The neighbor's expression darkened. "Isadora got sick, real sick. She had to leave town to get treatment. She left the girl with her mother, Betty." "And where is Betty now?" The neighbor's expression darkened. "Poor Betty. They took her to work on a farm over near Morgantown. They said it was only for a few months that she would earn well, but it's been over a year and no one has seen her return." Dulcie returned to the mansion with a heavy heart. Zara's story was even more tragic than they imagined. Her mother had fallen ill and disappeared. Her grandmother had been taken to work in dubious conditions, and she had been left completely alone. But there was something that disturbed her even more. Isadora had worked for Ted. She had been fired when she most needed the job during her pregnancy, and now her daughter was being raised by the same person who had dismissed her mother. "Mr. Mansour," said Dulcie that night, finding him in the office. "I need to talk to you about something important." When Dulcie showed Isadora's record and told him what she had discovered, Ted was silent for a long time. He vaguely remembered the employee, a girl who was always worried, who was frequently absent from work. At the time, he had followed the manager's recommendation to dismiss her for disciplinary reasons. "I fired her mother," he said finally, guilt weighing on his voice. "If I had been more understanding, maybe—" "You didn't know the whole situation," Dulcie tried to console him. "I should have known. It's my obligation to know the situation of my employees." Ted covered his face with his hands. "And now her daughter is here, helping me save the same businesses that destroyed her mother's life." "Maybe it's fate," suggested Dulce. "A way to fix the mistakes of the past." Ted looked out the window of the office, where he could see Zara playing in the garden illuminated by the outdoor lights. She had created a small bed of medicinal herbs and talked to the plants, while watering them, her soft ditties echoing through the night. "Dulce, I want you to help me find Betty," he said suddenly. "If she really is working in bad conditions on some farm, I need to bring her back." "Mr. Mansour, that could be dangerous. If they are really exploiting workers." "I don't care." "Zara lost her mother. She can't lose her grandmother too, and I have a debt to this family that I need to pay." That night, a new determination was born in Ted's heart. It was not enough just to take care of Zara. He needed to reunite what was left of her family, even if it meant facing dangers that he did not yet fully understand. What he did not know was that his decision to look for Betty was about to reveal a network of exploitation, much wider and more dangerous than anyone could imagine. The search for Betty began in an apparently simple way, but quickly turned into something much more complex and dangerous than Ted had imagined. He hired Mark Peterson, a private investigator from Charleston, recommended by his lawyer, to locate Zara's grandmother. "Cases of missing rural workers are more common than people imagine," explained Mark during his first visit to the mansion. At 48, he was a former police officer who had specialized in finding missing people, especially elderly women and people in socially vulnerable situations. "How does it work?" asked Ted. "They promise well-paid work on distant farms. When the person gets there, they discover that the conditions are completely different from what was promised. Then they create artificial debts, lodging, food, transportation, that keep the worker trapped indefinitely." Dulcie listened to the conversation with growing horror. "But isn't that illegal?" "Completely illegal," confirmed Mark. "But it happens in isolated places, far from the eyes of the authorities. And the victims are usually people that no one will look for." While the adults discussed the details of the investigation, Zara played in the garden, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation. But her sharp ears picked up fragments of the conversation, and she understood more than she showed. "Grandma Betty is in danger," she murmured to herself, stroking one of the plants she had cultivated. "I need to help find her." In the following days, Mark began his investigation. He visited the poor neighborhoods of Harmony Creek, spoke with people who knew Betty, and gradually put together a map of her last known journey. The clues led to an agricultural region near Morgantown, known for cattle farms and eucalyptus plantations. "I found 3 people who remember seeing Betty getting on a truck with other workers," he reported to Ted after a week of investigation. The truck had the logo of St. Benedict's Agricultural Company, a company that recruits labor for various farms in the region. And now? Now comes the tricky part. I'll need to visit these farms in person, and some of them don't like strangers. Asking questions, Ted felt a chill in his stomach. His heart condition had worsened in recent weeks, and the cardiologist had scheduled the first surgery for the following month. He was not in a condition to face physical confrontations or situations of extreme stress. "How long will this take?" he asked. "It could be a week, it could be a month. It depends on how many farms I need to visit and the cooperation I find." Meanwhile, at the mansion, an unexpected discovery was being made. Zara had developed the habit of spending hours in Ted's office, organizing documents and doing her own business analysis. Dulcie found her there every morning, surrounded by papers arranged in meticulous piles. "What are you doing, little one?" Dulcie asked one morning. "I'm looking for more people who were stealing from Ted," replied Zara naturally. "If Nestor managed to steal for so long, maybe there are others too." The answer made Dulcie uneasy. "Did you find anything?" Zara nodded gravely. "I did. There's one person spending the store's money on strange things." "What kind of things?" "Expensive dinners, gifts, trips. But this person isn't from Ted's family." Dulcie examined the documents that Zara had separated. They were receipts and vouchers for expenses made with corporate cards from Mansour's stores. The amounts were high: fancy restaurants, luxury hotels, expensive jewelry, and all authorized by the same person, Oliver Mansour, Ted's younger brother. "My God," whispered Dulcie, "the boss's brother-in-law." Oliver Mansour, 55, was a minority partner in the stores and responsible for the special purchases and commercial partnership sector. He has always been seen as an astute businessman, although with a more extravagant lifestyle than his brother. Ted trusted him completely, considering him his right-hand man and closest confidant. "Dulcie, do you know this man?" asked Zara, showing a photo of Oliver that was in one of the folders. "I do. It's Uncle Oliver, Ted's brother. Does he come here often?" "He does, almost every week." "Why?" Zara was thoughtful. "Because when he comes, he always leaves with things." "What kind of things?" "Small things. Books, ornaments, sometimes food from the refrigerator. Aunt Vivian doesn't like it, but she doesn't say anything." Dulcie began to put the pieces together. Oliver had always been known for his financial difficulties, despite working in the family business. He lived borrowing money from Ted, always with promises to pay as soon as he closed some important business. "Zara, are you sure these expenses are all from Uncle Oliver?" "I am. Look here," she said, showing a series of receipts. "They all have the same signature. And this one is from a restaurant on the day I saw him leaving the house all dressed up at night." The discovery created a terrible dilemma for Dulcie. How to tell Ted that his own brother was stealing from him, especially now when he was sick and had already suffered Nestor's betrayal. "Dulcie," said Zara, noticing the housekeeper's anguish, "Ted needs to know, doesn't he?" "He does, little one. But this is going to hurt him a lot. Grandma Betty always said that the truth hurts, but the lie kills." That afternoon, when Ted returned from another medical appointment, Dulcie sought him out in the office. With a heavy heart, she showed Zara's findings on Oliver's irregular expenses. Ted examined the documents in growing silence. The summed amounts reached more than $100,000 in the last 2 years. Expensive dinners, gifts for unknown women, luxury hotels, all paid for with money from the stores. "It can't be," he murmured. "Oliver wouldn't do that to me." "Mr. Mansour," said Dulcie gently, "Zara has proven to be very accurate with numbers. Oliver is my brother. We built this together. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who disappoint us the most." Ted spent the entire night analyzing the documents, looking for alternative explanations. But the evidence was irrefutable. His brother had been stealing from him systematically, using his position of trust to finance a lifestyle that he could not sustain. The next morning, he called Oliver asking for an urgent meeting. "I need to talk to you about some financial issues from the stores." "Sure, bro, I'll stop by in the afternoon." When Oliver arrived at the mansion, he found Ted in the office with all the receipts scattered on the table. The casual smile on his face faded when he saw the documents. "Ted, I can explain." "Can you really?" "Because I'd love to understand how my own brother managed to spend $100,000 from the company in restaurants and hotels without me knowing." Oliver tried to invent excuses about legitimate business expenses, business meetings, and commercial representation, but the evidence was too clear. Many of the expenses had been made on weekends, in cities where they had no suppliers, always accompanied by expenses that were clearly not business-related. "How long?" asked Ted, his voice laden with deep pain. "Ted, you don't understand the pressure I live under. My debts, my situation. How long have you been stealing from me?" Oliver broke down. 2 years, maybe 3. I always planned to return everything, but you never returned it. You just stole more." The confrontation lasted 2 painful hours. Oliver confessed that he had started small, justifying personal expenses as representation expenses. Gradually, the scheme grew until it became a systematic way to finance his irresponsible lifestyle. "You're my brother," said Ted finally. "I would have helped you if you had asked. You didn't need to steal." "I was ashamed. You've always been the successful one, the responsible one. I didn't want to seem like a failure. And now, what do you seem like now?" "Ooh." When Oliver left the mansion that afternoon, one of the most important relationships of Ted's life had been destroyed. In a few weeks, he had discovered that both his accountant and his own brother were stealing from him. That night, Zara found Ted sitting alone in the garden, watching the pond she had recovered. "Are you sad?" she asked. "I am, little one." "Because of Uncle Oliver?" Ted looked at her surprised. "How did you know?" "I heard you talking, and I saw when he left crying." Zara sat next to him on the bench. "Grandma Betty always said that when the people we love do bad things, we get sad, even knowing they were wrong. Your grandmother was very wise." "She's coming back soon," said Zara with a confidence that touched Ted's heart. "And when she comes back, our family will be complete." Ted hugged the girl, thinking about how she had become his anchor amid so many storms. But he still didn't know that the discovery about Oliver was just the beginning of even more painful revelations that were yet to come. Ted's first surgery was scheduled for a Monday in August, just when Mark Peterson called with news about Betty. The call came in the early hours of the morning before the procedure, waking the whole house with its insistent ringing. "I found her," said Mark without preamble when Ted answered the phone. "But the situation is worse than we imagined." Ted, still dizzy from the preoperative medication, had difficulty processing the information. "How so, worse?" "Betty is on a farm 100 miles from Morgantown, on a property that keeps workers in conditions analogous to slavery. They confiscated her documents and created a debt that grows every month." "How much does she owe?" "According to the records I managed to see, more than $15,000. Lodging, food, medicine, transportation, all overpriced to keep the workers trapped." Ted felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with his heart problems. "And is she okay?" "Physically, she is weakened, but alive. I managed to talk to her for a few minutes. She asked about her granddaughter constantly." "What do we need to do to get her out of there?" Mark hesitated. "This is the tricky part. We can't just show up there and demand that she be released. The farmer, a man named Sebastian Moore, has connections with local authorities. Any wrong move could result in Betty being transferred to an even more isolated location." So what's the plan? I need time to put together an operation with the Department of Labor. But that could take weeks, maybe months. Ted closed his eyes, feeling the weight of another responsibility he couldn't adequately assume at the moment. His surgery was scheduled for a few hours from now, and the doctor had been clear about the risks. Mark, I need to tell you something. I'm having heart surgery today. I may not be available for the next few weeks. Mr. Mansour, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were sick. Continue working on the case. Do everything that is necessary, but don't put Betty at greater risk. When he hung up the phone, Ted found Dulcie waiting at the bedroom door, clearly worried. Was that news about Zara's grandma? It was. They are not good. Ted told Dulcie what Mark had discovered, seeing the horror grow on the housekeeper's face. My God, poor Betty. And how are we going to tell Zara? We're not going to tell her yet. She doesn't need to know the details until we have a solution. But Zara, with her penetrating intuition, already knew that something was wrong. She appeared in the kitchen for breakfast with eyes red from crying, as if she had had nightmares all night. Is Grandma hurt? She asked directly to Ted. Why do you ask that, little one? I dreamed about her. She was in a dark place, with many sad people, and she called me, but I couldn't reach her. Ted and Dulcie exchanged meaningful glances. Zara's ability to perceive things that were beyond her direct experience continued to surprise them. We're going to find your grandmother, promised Ted, hugging the girl, but it may take a while. You're going to get better first, said Zara with a wisdom that touched his heart deeply. Then we're going to find Grandma together. A few hours later, Ted was being prepared for surgery at St. Luke's Hospital in Charleston. Vivian accompanied him, but her presence was more procedural than affectionate. The last few months had created a distance between them that seemed impossible to overcome. If anything happens to me, Ted said to her before entering the surgical center, take care of Zara. Promise you'll take care of her. Ted, don't talk like that. You're going to be okay. Promise, Vivian hesitated. I promise. The surgery lasted 6 hours. During that time, at the Mansour mansion, something unexpected was happening. Zara had decided to take her own action regarding her grandmother's situation. Dulce, she said, appearing in the kitchen with a small backpack on her back. I'm going to look for Grandma Betty. Zara, you can't do that. It's too dangerous. I can't stay here doing nothing while she suffers. Dulcie had to use all her authority to convince Zara to stay. She explained that experienced adults were taking care of the case, that going out alone would be dangerous not only for her, but also for her grandmother. If you disappear too, how will Grandma Betty know where to find you when she comes back? Dulcie argued. The logic worked, but Zara was visibly distressed for the rest of the day. She spent hours in the garden, talking to her plants and singing sad ditties that Betty had taught her. It was during one of those sessions in the garden that she made a discovery that would change everything. While tending to her bed of medicinal herbs, Zara found a yellowed envelope buried near the roots of one of the plants. The envelope was addressed to Ted Mansour and dated 3 years ago. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter with feminine and delicate handwriting. Mr. Mansour, my name is Isadora Santos. I worked in your store for a few months in 2018. I know you fired me for absences, but you need to understand that I was pregnant and feeling very sick. I had no choice. Now my daughter has been born and I need help. I have nowhere to go and my mother is sick too. If you can give me a new job opportunity, I promise I won't be absent anymore. My daughter's name is Zara, and she is all I have in the world. Please, have mercy on us. Isadora Santos. Zara read the letter several times, her small hands trembling. It was a letter from her mother, asking Ted for help 3 years ago. A letter that had never reached his hands. My mother knew Ted, she whispered to herself. She asked him for help. But why was the letter buried in the garden? Why did it never reach Ted? Zara ran inside the house looking for Dulcie. When she showed the letter to the housekeeper, Dulcie's face turned pale. Where did you find this? Buried in the garden, near my plants. Dulcie examined the envelope carefully. The postal stamp showed that it had been correctly delivered to the mansion. Someone had received the letter and deliberately hidden it, preventing it from reaching Ted. Who did this? Asked Zara. Dulcie looked at the writing on the envelope, recognizing the elegant handwriting of who had written the address on the back. Received on May 15th, 2021. VM. Vivian Mansour. Dulcie, who is VM? Dulcie closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the discovery. It's Mrs. Mansour, little one. Aunt Vivian hid my mother's letter? It seems so. Zara was silent for a long time, processing the information. Her mother had asked Ted for help, but Vivian had intercepted the letter. If Ted had received the letter, maybe he could have helped Isadora before she got sick. Maybe her mum was still alive. Why did she do it? Zara asked, tears starting to stream down her face. I don't know, sweetie, but we're going to find out. Just then, the phone rang. It was the hospital informing them that Theodore's surgery had been successful, but he would need to stay in for a week to recover. Dulcie looked at Zara, who was still holding her mother's letter, and made a decision. When Theodore came home, he would know everything. About Betty, about the intercepted letter, about Vivian's role in keeping Isadora away from the help she desperately needed. The silent war between Vivian and Zara was about to become an open conflict, and this time Theodore would have to choose a side definitively. Dulcie, Zara said, carefully putting away her mother's letter. When Theodore comes back, can I talk to him alone? Of course, sweetie, of course. That night, while Vivian slept peacefully at the hospital beside her recovering husband, Zara stayed awake, planning the conversation that would change everything. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, she felt real anger. Not at the frogs in the hole, not at poverty, not at the injustices of life, but at someone specific who had deliberately caused suffering to her family. The gentle and patient girl was about to show that she also knew how to fight when necessary. Theodore returned home on a rainy Thursday in August, still weakened by the surgery, but determined to regain control of his life. The doctors had been clear. He would need at least a month of rest before returning to work, and 2 additional surgeries would be necessary in the next 6 months. How are things? He asked Dulcie when he arrived at the mansion, immediately noticing the tension in the air. We have a lot to talk about, Mr. Theodore, she replied, giving a meaningful look to Zara, who was sitting on the porch watching. The rain! Vivian had decided to stay a few more days at the hospital to take care of medical matters, but Dulcie knew she was avoiding coming home. In recent days, the housekeeper had noticed that Vivian was increasingly anxious and evasive. Zara has something important to show you, Dulcie said. Maybe it's best if you two talk alone. Theodore found Zara in the office, sitting in the leather armchair that was too big for her, carefully holding a yellowed envelope. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying a lot. Hi, sweetie, I missed you, he said, sitting down in the chair next to her. Theodore, I found something you need to see, Zara said, her voice more serious than any 4-year-old's should sound. She handed him the letter, watching his expression closely as he read. Theodore remained silent for a long time after finishing reading, his hands trembling slightly, not from the medication, but from emotion. Where did you find this? He finally asked. Buried in the garden near my plants, with dirt on top, as if someone had hidden it on purpose. Theodore examined the envelope more carefully, noticing the postmark and the note on the back. VM. His wife's initials were there, clear evidence of who had intercepted the mail. Zara, do you understand what this letter means? Yes. My mom asked you for help, but Aunt Vivian hid the letter. If you had received it, maybe you could have helped my mom before she got sick. The brutal simplicity of Zara's observation hit Theodore like a punch to the gut. His wife had deliberately prevented him from helping a desperate mother, a former employee who was begging for a second chance. Why did she do it? Zara asked, echoing the question that tormented Theodore. I don't know, sweetie, but I'm gonna find out. Just then, they heard the sound of a car arriving at the mansion. Vivian had decided to come back earlier than expected, bringing with her a nervous energy that Dulce recognized immediately. Theodore, so glad you're home, she exclaimed, entering the office with a forced smile. How are you feeling? Vivian, we need to talk, now. Of course, dear. Zara, why don't you go play in the garden? The adults need to talk. She stays, Theodore said firmly. This conversation concerns her, too. Vivian noticed the letter in her husband's hands and paled visibly. Theodore, I can explain. Can you really? Because I'd love to understand how my wife intercepted mail addressed to me and buried it in the garden like it was trash. You don't understand the situation we were in at the time, Vivian began, her defenses crumbling quickly. You were already under pressure at work. We had financial problems, and suddenly a former employee appears asking for money. She wasn't asking for money, Theodore interrupted. She was asking for work, an opportunity to support her daughter. The same daughter who is now living in our house. Vivian exploded, completely losing her composure. I knew this was going to happen. I knew that if you knew about the letter, you would want to help, and we would end up exactly where we are now. And where are we now? With a child who isn't. Our family eating our food, sleeping in our house, causing problems in our marriage. Zara shrank in the armchair, but her eyes remained fixed on Vivian. I didn't mean to cause problems, she said in a small voice. No, Zara, Theodore said, placing his hand protectively on the girl's shoulder. You didn't cause any problems. The problem was here long before you arrived. Vivian realized she had gone too far. Theodore, I didn't mean that about the girl. It's just that this whole situation makes me nervous. This whole situation? You mean having to share our house with an orphan child whose mother begged for help and you deliberately denied? I was protecting our family. Protecting it from what? From doing the right thing? From being decent human beings? The discussion continued for more than an hour, with increasingly painful revelations. Vivian confessed that she had always known that Theodore tended to be excessively generous with struggling employees, and that she had intercepted other mail over the years when she believed it might compromise the family's wealth. How many other letters? Theodore asked, his voice dangerously low. Theodore, you have to understand. How many? 3, maybe 4. All from former employees asking for financial help. Theodore stood up from the chair, walking to the window. The rain had stopped, and the garden created by Zara shone with droplets of water that looked like tears on the leaves. Vivian, I want you to leave this house. What? I want you to pack your things and go to your sister's house. I need time to think about our marriage. Theodore, you can't be serious. You're sick, you need care. I have Dulce and Zara to take care of me, and apparently they're more honest with me than my own wife. Vivian looked at Zara with an expression of anger and despair. This is your fault, she hissed. Ever since you got here, my life has turned into hell. Vivian! Theodore roared. Enough! Zara got up from the armchair and walked to Vivian. For a moment, the two stared at each other, the elegant middle-aged woman and the 4-year-old girl who had uncovered her secrets. Aunt Vivian, Zara said with a calmness that surprised everyone, I'm sorry you hate me, but my mom needed help, and you didn't let her get it. That wasn't right. You don't understand anything about adult life, Vivian replied, but her voice had lost all its strength. I understand about hunger. I understand about fear. I understand about needing help and having no one, Zara said. And I understand that you could have helped my mom, but you chose not to. Vivian left the room without another word, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. An hour later, she had packed her bags and left for her sister's house, leaving only a note, saying she would return when Theodore came to his senses. That night, the mansion was quieter than ever. Theodore had dinner with Zara in the kitchen, the two eating sandwiches prepared by Dulcie while processing the day's events. "Are you sad because Aunt Vivian left?" Zara asked. "I'm sad because I discovered that the person I've lived with for 20 years isn't who I thought she was," Theodore honestly replied. "Grandma Betty always said that sometimes people show who they really are only when they're scared." "And what do you think Vivian was scared of?" Zara thought carefully before answering. "Of sharing. Of you liking me more than her." The girl's insight continued to surprise Theodore. "Maybe you're right." "Theodore," Zara said, taking his hand with her small hands, "now that we know about my mom's letter, can we look for her too?" Theodore felt his heart tighten. Mark had only found out about Betty, but had not been able to get information about Isadora's whereabouts. And considering the time that had passed and the precarious situation she was in when she wrote the letter, "We'll try, sweetie," he promised, deciding to protect her from hopes that might not be realized. "We'll try." That night, for the first time in months, Theodore slept soundly. The surgery had been successful, the lies had been exposed, and he finally knew the truth about how Zara had come to him. It wasn't fate or coincidence, it was the failure of his own family to do the right thing when it mattered most. But now he had a chance to right the wrongs of the past. And this time, nothing. And no one would stop him from doing what was right. 3 weeks after Vivian's departure, the Mansour mansion had found a new rhythm of life. Dulce had officially assumed the role of Theodore's primary caregiver during his recovery, while Zara had become his unofficial assistant, organizing medications and remembering appointment times with a precision that impressed the doctors. "Mr. Theodore, it's 10 o'clock. Time for your blood pressure medicine," Zara announced every morning, bringing the pill on a small tray along with a glass of water. "Thank you, Dr. Zara," Theodore joked, and the girl smiled with a genuine joy that lit up the whole house. During this period, Mark Peterson had managed to establish contact with human rights organizations and prepare a coordinated operation to rescue Betty. The plan was complex and risky, involving federal authorities and NGOs specializing in combating slave labor. "The operation is scheduled for next week," Mark informed during a visit to the mansion. "But there's something I need to tell you. I got more information about Isadora." Theodore and Dulce exchanged worried glances. Zara was in the garden, apparently, playing, but they knew she heard everything with her keen hearing. "What kind of information?" Theodore asked. "Isadora was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in Morgantown 2 years ago. Severe depression and problems related to abandoning her daughter. She didn't know Zara was okay." "Is she still in there?" "No, she was discharged 6 months ago and is living in a support house for people in recovery. She works as a cleaner in a school." Theodore felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Isadora was alive, but had suffered deeply believing she had abandoned her daughter. "Does she know we found Zara?" "Not yet. I thought it best to talk to you first. The reunion could be traumatic for both." It was at that moment that Zara appeared at the door of the room, carrying a vase with a small plant that she had grown especially for the occasion. "This is for my mom," she said simply, placing the vase on the table. "When you bring her home." The silence that followed was filled with emotion. Mark looked at the girl with growing admiration. "How did you know we were talking about your mother?" "Because you get worried voices when you talk about her, same as when you talk about Grandma Betty." Zara sat down in the armchair that had become her favorite. "She's alive, isn't she?" Theodore decided to be honest. "Yes, sweetie, your mom is alive and well, but she's been through some very difficult times." "Why did she leave me with Grandma?" "Because she was sick and thought she couldn't take care of you properly. Sometimes mums do that when they love their children very much." Zara nodded with the wisdom of someone who had learned early that the lives of adults were complicated. "Can I see her?" "Soon," Theodore promised. "First we're going to bring your grandma home, then we'll arrange the meeting with your mum." During the following days, the house filled with a new energy. Zara prepared a special room for Betty, choosing flowers from the garden and arranging the furniture the way she thought her grandmother would like. Dulcie cooked special dishes, remembering the traditional recipes that Betty's generation appreciated. Theodore, in turn, made a decision that surprised everyone. He decided to sell one of the 3 stores to have enough resources not only to pay for Betty's rescue, but also to set up an aid fund for other workers in similar situations. "Mr. Theodore, are you sure about this?" Robert, the manager, asked when he received the news. "The store on Elm Street is our most profitable." "I'm sure. There are things more important than profit." The transformation in Theodore was visible to everyone who knew him. The calculating businessman focused only on business had given way to a man who prioritized justice and social responsibility. Zara had awakened in him a conscience that had been dormant for decades. "Theodore," she said one afternoon while they were watering the garden together, "when Grandma and Mom come back, are we going to be a big family?" "Yes, sweetie, a very special family." "And Aunt Vivian?" The question caught Theodore off guard. Vivian had called a few times trying to negotiate a return, but he still wasn't ready to forgive the interception of the letters and years of lies. "I don't know yet. What do you think?" Zara thought carefully. "I think she was scared, but fear isn't an excuse to hurt other people." "You're very wise for a 4-year-old. Grandma always said that suffering teaches faster than age." On Friday of that week, Mark called with decisive news. "The operation has been approved. Tomorrow morning, federal agents will surround the farm and rescue all workers in irregular situations." "Does Betty know we're coming to get her?" "No. For security reasons, we couldn't communicate in advance, but I managed to pass a message through another worker that her granddaughter is well and waiting for her." Theodore spent the night awake, anxious and hopeful. Beside him, Zara slept peacefully, but he could see her smile in her sleep, as if she knew that something wonderful was about to happen. On Saturday morning at 6 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Mark, his voice full of emotion. "We did it! The operation was a success. We rescued 23 workers, including Betty. She's fine, a little physically weakened, but fine." "When can we see her?" "She's being taken to a hospital in Morgantown for routine medical exams. If everything is okay, you can pick her up tomorrow afternoon." Theodore woke Zara and Dulcie to share the news. The girl's joy was so intense that she began to cry with happiness, running through the garden and shouting to the plants that her grandma was coming home. "The flowers are going to be prettier now," she exclaimed, hugging every tree and bush she had grown. "Grandma Betty will see how I learned to take care of the plants," Dulcie cried with emotion, seeing Zara's happiness. "Mr. Theodore, this girl deserves all the happiness in the world. And she's going to have it," he promised. "We're going to make sure she does." And on Sunday afternoon, driving to Morgantown, Theodore watched Zara in the back seat, carefully holding the vase with the plant she had prepared for her grandmother. She hummed softly the ditties that Betty had taught her, their voices mixing with the sound of the engine. "Theodore," she said suddenly, "when I grow up, I want to help other children like you're helping me." "How so?" "I want to find lost children and bring their families back, just like you're doing with me." Theodore smiled, realizing that Zara was already planning to dedicate her life to helping others. At 4 years old, she possessed a compassion and sense of justice that many adults never develop. When they arrived at the hospital, they found Betty sitting in a wheelchair in the lobby, wearing clean clothes provided by the social workers. At 67 years old, she was visibly thinner and more aged, but her eyes lit up when she saw Zara running towards her. "My granddaughter, my little warrior," Betty cried, hugging Zara tightly. "I knew you were okay. I felt it in my heart. Grandma, I planted flowers for you, and I learned to make herbal tea. And Theodore took care of me really well." Betty looked at Theodore with tears in her eyes. "How can I thank you for what you've done?" "There's no need to thank me. Zara saved me first. She's the one who deserves gratitude." "Grandma," Zara said, handing over the vase with the plant, "this is your welcome plant. It will bloom in our garden." Betty held the vase as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. "It will bloom, my dear, just like our family." As they drove back to Harmony Creek, with Betty finally safe in the back seat next to her granddaughter, Theodore thought about how his life had completely changed. 6 months ago, he was a successful but lonely businessman. Now he was part of a makeshift but true family, united not by blood, but by love and choice. The next step would be to reunite Zara with her mother, Isadora. But for now, it was enough to have Betty back. The garden of the Mansour mansion was about to bloom even more with the presence of the wise woman who had raised that extraordinary girl. Betty's arrival at the Mansour mansion completely transformed the dynamics of the house. The 67-year-old woman, despite the physical weakness caused by the months of forced labor, carried a wisdom and a spiritual strength that filled the house, with a warm energy that had been missing for a long time. "Lord have mercy," Betty murmured on the first morning, observing the room that Zara had prepared for her. "I've never slept in such a soft bed in my life." "Do you like it, Grandma? I chose the yellow flowers because they're your favorites," Zara said, jumping on the bed next to her grandmother. "Too beautiful, my dear. But tell me everything that's happened since we separated." During the following days, Betty gradually regained her strength. Dulce prepared nutritious broths and fortifying teas, while Zara spent hours telling her grandmother about her life at the mansion, about Theodore, about the garden she had created, and about all the discoveries she had made. "So it was Mr. Theodore who saved you from the hole?" Betty asked, watching Theodore with penetrating eyes. "Actually, it was Zara who saved me," he corrected. "She's the one who has the gift of saving people." Betty smiled, recognizing in her granddaughter the same natural kindness that she had always admired. That girl was born with a heart too big for her little body. But not everything was rosy in the new family configuration. Betty's physical recovery was slow, and she often had nightmares about the months on the farm. She woke up screaming, reliving memories of working under the scorching sun, scarce food, and constant threats. "Grandma, it's okay," Zara said on those nights, hugging her grandmother who was trembling with fear. "You're safe now. No one will hurt you anymore." "I know, my granddaughter. It's just that sometimes the bad memories come back on their own." Theodore, observing Betty's suffering, made another decision that surprised everyone. He hired Dr. Miller, a psychologist specializing in trauma, to visit the mansion and help Betty process the experiences she had lived through. "Mr. Theodore, that must cost a fortune," Betty protested. "Betty, you're family now, and family takes care of each other." During those weeks of adaptation, Mark continued working to organize the reunion between Zara and Isadora. The situation was delicate. Isadora had spent 2 years believing she had abandoned her daughter, carrying a devastating guilt that had resulted in her psychiatric hospitalization. "She needs to be prepared gradually," Dr. Miller explained after talking to Isadora's therapists. "The discovery that her daughter is okay can be both a relief and a traumatic shock." "Why shock?" Theodore asked. "Because she built a narrative in her mind that she's a terrible mother who abandoned her daughter. Discovering that Zara is not only okay but thriving can generate complex feelings of inadequacy and fear of not being worthy of her daughter's love." It was a rainy Monday in September when Isadora finally agreed to meet Zara. The meeting was carefully planned to take place at the mansion in a familiar environment for the girl, with Betty's presence as a support figure. Theodore watched from the window as Mark's car arrived at the gate. A young woman about 25 years old got out of the vehicle with hesitant movements. Even from a distance, the resemblance to Zara was striking. The same big, dark eyes, the same brown hair, the same delicacy in her features. "Mommy's here," Zara announced simply, appearing next to Theodore at the window. She showed no nervousness, just a calm expectation that surprised all the adults. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "A little bit. But Grandma said that mothers always recognize their children, even after a long time." When Isadora entered the living room, accompanied by Mark and a social worker, the silence was complete. Mother and daughter looked at each other for a long moment, both processing the changes that the years had brought. "Zara," Isadora murmured, her voice trembling. "My little one?" "Hi, Mommy," Zara replied, taking a timid step towards her mother. "You're more beautiful than I remembered." Isadora knelt on the floor, opening her arms, and Zara ran into the embrace she had been waiting for years. Both cried silently, a cry of relief and reunion that deeply touched everyone present. "Forgive me, my daughter," Isadora sobbed. "Forgive me for leaving you. Forgive me for not being strong enough." "It's okay, Mommy. Grandma explained that you were sick, and I understood." During the following hours, mother and daughter talked, discreetly mediated by the social worker. Zara told about her life at the mansion, about Theodore, about the garden, about all the things she had learned. Isadora listened in wonder, realizing that her daughter had become a confident and articulate child. "She's well cared for," Isadora said to Theodore when the two went to play in the garden. "Better than I could have ever cared for her." "Zara is a special child, but you're her mother, Isadora. Nothing replaces that. I don't know if I'm worthy to be her mother. Look at everything she's achieved without me." She achieved it because she's your daughter. Her strength and kindness come from you." Betty, who had watched the reunion in silence, approached her daughter. "Isadora, my girl, you did what you could at the time. Don't blame yourself for the past." "Mom, I abandoned my daughter. You left your daughter with who could take better care of her at that moment. That's love, not abandonment." In the afternoon, when it was time for Isadora to leave, the farewell was less traumatic than everyone feared. Zara had understood that her mother needed time to feel ready to be a mother again. "Are you coming back?" Zara asked. "Yes, I am. Every weekend, if you let me." "Of course we let you," Theodore said. "This is your home too." In the following weeks, a new routine was established. Isadora visited the mansion every Saturday and Sunday, gradually rebuilding her relationship with Zara. During those meetings, she also developed a genuine friendship with Theodore and a special connection with Dulcie. "Mr. Theodore," Isadora said on one of those visits, I want to contribute to Zara's support." "Isadora, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. For my self-esteem, to feel useful. Don't you have some work in the stores?" Theodore thought for a moment. Since Nestor's dismissal and Oliver's departure, he needed reliable people to help with the administration. How about an administrative assistant? You could learn to do what Zara does with the numbers. Zara does administrative work. She has a natural talent for financial analysis. She discovered theft schemes that went unnoticed for years. Isadora looked at her daughter with growing admiration. She takes after Grandma Betty. She was always good with numbers. During October, a new family structure was taking shape. Betty had established herself as the wise matriarch of the house. Isadora had begun working at the Mansour stores and was gradually reassuming her role as a mother. Dulcie continued as the organizational heart of the family, and Zara was the center that united everyone with her unconditional love. Theodore watched these changes with deep satisfaction. His second surgery had been successful. His businesses were stabilizing under the new, more ethical management, and he had found a true family after years of emotional loneliness. But there was a shadow on the horizon that he was trying to ignore. Vivian had hired a lawyer and was threatening divorce proceedings that could significantly complicate the family's financial situation. She demanded half of the assets, including the mansion where Zara's family now lived. "Mr. Theodore," Isadora said one afternoon when he seemed worried, "can I ask what's bothering you?" "Legal problems with Vivian. She wants half of the assets in the divorce. And if she gets it, we'll have to sell the mansion, maybe one of the stores too." Isadora was silent for a moment. "Mr. Theodore, you saved my family. If you need it, we'll find a way to help." "How? I don't know yet, but Zara always says that when people truly love each other, they always find a way to stay together." That night, Theodore wondered if love would really be enough to keep the family they had built together. He was about to discover that Zara, once again, had her own plans to solve the adults' problems. Theodore's third surgery was scheduled for November, just when the legal battle with Vivian reached its most critical point. Her lawyer, Dr. Jenkins, had obtained an injunction that froze all the couple's assets until the divorce was resolved. "Does that mean I can't sell anything to pay for the surgery?" Theodore asked his own lawyer, Sebastian Moore, during a tense meeting in his office. "Exactly. And worse, if Vivian can prove that you are squandering marital assets to support people who aren't family, she can demand even greater compensation." "But Zara and her family are my responsibility now." "Legally, Mr. Theodore, they're nothing. You haven't officially adopted Zara. You have no document proving legal responsibility for her." The reality of the situation hit Theodore like a punch in the gut. In his urgency to do what was right, he had neglected the legal formalities that could protect Zara. Now Vivian could not only take half of his assets, but also force Zara's family to leave the mansion. "How much time do we have?" he asked. "The conciliation hearing is scheduled for next week. If you don't reach an agreement, the process could extend for months." Theodore returned home with a heavy heart. He found Zara in the garden, taking care of her plants as she always did when she was worried. At 5 years old now, she had developed an even more acute intuition to perceive when adults were distressed. "What happened at the lawyer's?" she asked, without looking up from the flowers she was watering. "How do you know I went to the lawyer's?" "Because you left with a worried face and came back with an even more worried face. And because Dulcie said that Aunt Vivian wants to take our house." Theodore sighed. "Zara, we may have to move from here." "Where to?" "I don't know yet. Maybe a smaller, simpler house." Zara continued watering the plants in silence for a few minutes. "Theodore, can I ask you a question?" "Sure." "Why did you marry Aunt Vivian?" The question caught Theodore off guard. "Why do you want to know that?" "Because if you really loved each other before, maybe you can still talk like people who used to love each other." Zara's wisdom once again surprised him. "You think I should try to talk to her?" "I think that every time people fight over things, they forget to talk about feelings." That night, Theodore made a courageous decision. He called Vivian and asked for a private meeting, away from the lawyers and legal paperwork. "Theodore? Why are you calling? You should be talking to your lawyer," Vivian said, her voice cold but with a hint of curiosity. "I need to talk to you, personally, about us, not about assets or properties." There was a long pause. "Where?" "At the town square, where we met." The next day, Theodore found Vivian sitting on the same bench where they had had their first date 22 years ago. She was elegantly dressed as always, but there was a sadness in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. "Are you okay?" he asked, sitting down next to her. "I'm living at my sister's house, suing my husband for marital abandonment. How do you think I am?" "Vivian, we need to talk about what really happened between us. What happened is that you chose a strange child instead of your wife. I chose to do what was right, something you made impossible when you intercepted Isadora's letters." Vivian was silent for a long time, watching the children playing in the square. "You want to know the truth, Theodore? I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of you finding out what I'm really like. Selfish, controlling, unable to love anyone more than I love my own comfort." Her words came out in a painful whisper. "When I saw that letter from Isadora, I knew that if you helped her, you would discover that I would never be able to do the same." "Vivian, you've always been generous, always wanted to help people. I've always just wanted to protect what was ours. When Zara appeared, I saw how you looked at her with a love I never saw in your eyes when you looked at me." Theodore processed his wife's words, realizing for the first time the depth of the insecurity she carried. "Why didn't you ever tell me this?" "Because it was easier to blame you, to blame Zara, blaming anyone but admitting that I'm not a good person." "You're not a bad person, Vivian, just lost." "Yes, I am, Theodore, and you deserve someone better. Zara deserves someone better." They sat in silence for a few minutes, 22 years of marriage being revisited and understood in a new way. "What do you want, Vivian, really?" "I want you to be happy. I want Zara to have the family she deserves, and I want to stop being the villain in everyone's story." "And the lawsuit? The assets?" Vivian smiled for the first time in months. "I'm going to drop the lawsuit. You can keep everything. I just want one thing in return." "What?" "I want Zara to know that not all people change. Some were born wrong and can never fix themselves. But that doesn't mean she should stop believing in good people. Vivian, you can change. It's not too late. For me it is, but not for you and your new family." A week later, Vivian officially dropped the divorce lawsuit and signed a document waiving any rights to Theodore's assets. Her only requirement was that he legally formalize the adoption of Zara, ensuring that she would never be helpless again. "Why did she do that?" Isadora asked when she heard the news. "Because in the end, even complicated people can do the right thing," Theodore replied. Zara, who had overheard the conversation, nodded seriously. "Grandma Betty always said that even the most wounded plants can give beautiful flowers if someone cares for them with patience." "And do you think Aunt Vivian can blossom?" Theodore asked. "I think everyone can. They just need to want to." The following month, Zara's adoption papers were finalized. Officially, she became Zara Mansour Santos, carrying both Theodore's last name and that of her biological family. The ceremony at the courthouse was simple, but deeply moving. "Now we're a real family on paper too," Zara said, admiring her new birth certificate. "We've always been a real family," Betty corrected. "The paper just makes official what the heart already knew." Theodore's third surgery was successful, and his recovery was faster than the previous ones. According to the doctors, having a loving family around had significantly accelerated his healing process. "Mr. Theodore," Dr. Miller said during a consultation, "your exams are excellent. I can say that you are officially cured." "Cured of what?" Zara asked, who always accompanied the medical consultations. Of the sick heart, the doctor replied, smiling at the girl. Oh, I already knew that, Zara said naturally. His heart got better when our family became complete. During December, the Mansour mansion was preparing for its first Christmas as a united family. Betty taught traditional recipes to Dulce and Isadora, while Zara decorated the house with flowers from the garden and colorful drawings. Theodore, she said one afternoon, while they were decorating the Christmas tree together, do you remember when you asked me if I was afraid of anything? I remember. I said I was afraid of being alone forever. Now, I'm not afraid of that anymore. Why not? Because I learned that family isn't just who is born together, it's who chooses to stay together. Theodore hugged his adopted daughter, thinking about how a 4-year-old girl had taught him, Vivian, and an entire community that true love knows no barriers of social class, blood, or conventions. And I learned, he said, that sometimes the most important people in our lives arrive when we least expect them, in the most unlikely places. Like at the bottom of a hole full of frogs? Exactly like at the bottom of a hole full of frogs. That night, while the whole family slept peacefully in the mansion that was now truly a home, Theodore made one last plan. In the coming year, he would expand the project to help exploited rural workers, creating a foundation in Zara's name to rescue other families separated by circumstances. After all, he had learned that when you have so much, the only sensible thing to do is share. The new year brought even deeper changes for the Mansour Santos family. Theodore had formalized the creation of the Zara Foundation, an organization dedicated to rescuing and reuniting families separated by labor exploitation. The headquarters operated in the former office of the store he had sold, transformed into a reception and support center. Mr. Theodore, we have more than 12 cases of missing workers this month alone, reported Sandra, the social coordinator he had hired to manage the foundation, and 3 families of orphaned children looking for relatives. How many have we managed to reunite since we started? 27 families, and we found temporary homes for 15 children. Zara, now 5.5 years old, had become the official mascot of the foundation. Her weekly visits to the center brought joy to the other children who were waiting for news from their families, and her natural ability to comfort and encourage impressed all the staff. Zara has a special gift, Sandra observed. The children who arrive here traumatized open up to her in a way they can't with adults. She went through the same thing as them, Theodore explained. She understands the pain in a way we can't. During one of those visits, Zara made a discovery that would once again change the course of events. A 7-year-old girl named Luisa had arrived at the foundation the previous week, brought by authorities who found her living alone in an abandoned shack on the outskirts of Harmony Creek. Luisa doesn't talk to anyone, Sandra explained to Zara. She's too traumatized. We don't even know her full name. Zara approached the girl with the patience she had learned by watching her grandmother take care of wounded plants. She sat next to Luisa in the foundation's garden without trying to force a conversation, just sharing her silent presence. Do you like flowers? Zara asked after a few minutes, offering a daisy she had picked. Luisa nodded shyly, accepting the flower with trembling fingers. I like them too. My grandma taught me that flowers grow better when we talk to them. Do you want to try? During the next hour, Zara taught Luisa how to take care of the plants in the garden, humming softly the ditties that Betty had taught her. Gradually, the girl began to relax and eventually began to whisper a few words. Luisa Moreira, she said when Zara asked her full name. The last name made Zara freeze. Moreira was the name of the farmer who had exploited Betty. Luisa, do you know a man named Sebastian Moreira? Louisa's eyes filled with tears. He's my grandpa, but he's very mean. Did he hurt you? Louisa nodded, showing scars on her arms that were painfully familiar to Zara. He hit me when I didn't work fast. He said I was useless like my mom. Zara held the girl's hand gently. You're not useless, and your grandpa was wrong to hurt you. That night, Zara told Theodore about her conversation with Louisa. The discovery that the granddaughter of Sebastian Morera himself was being abused by him added a new dimension to the case they had faced. Theodore, Zara said with a determination that surprised everyone, I want to go talk to that Sebastian. Zara, that's dangerous. He's a violent man. But maybe he'll listen to a child. Sometimes adults say things to children that they don't say to other adults. Theodore hesitated. The idea was risky, but Zara had repeatedly demonstrated a unique ability to touch people's hearts, even the most hardened. If we go, it will be with full protection. Mark will go with us, and we'll notify the authorities. 3 days later, a small convoy headed for Sebastian Morera's farm. In addition to Theodore, Zara, and Mark, there were 2 undercover federal agents and a social worker. The plan was simple. Zara would try to talk to Sebastian about his granddaughter, while the others would document any evidence of slave labor that might still exist on the property. The farm was exactly as Betty had described. Isolated, poorly maintained, with workers who looked malnourished and frightened. Sebastian Morera was a 60-year-old man, tall and intimidating, with hard eyes that showed no emotion when they saw the visitors. What do you want here? He asked, blocking the entrance to the main house. I came to talk about your granddaughter, Louisa, Theodore said. What granddaughter? I don't have any granddaughter. That's when Zara stepped forward. Mr. Sebastian, my name is Zara. Your granddaughter is in my temporary home, and she misses you. The mention of Louisa herself missing him caught Sebastian off guard. Louisa is okay? She is, but sad. She told me that you took care of her after her mother left. Took care of nothing. That girl was just trouble. She said you taught her to work in the fields, that you planted corn together. Zara had made up this story, but something in Sebastian's face changed. For a moment, a softer expression crossed his hard features. She said that? Yes, and that she wanted to learn to plant flowers, too, just like I learned from my grandma. Louisa always liked flowers, Sebastian murmured, lowering his guard slightly. Mr. Sebastian, can I ask why you get angry with her sometimes? Zara's direct question made the man hesitate. Because life is hard, and children need to learn that the world isn't easy. But children also need to learn that they are loved. Otherwise, they get very sad inside. And who is going to love a child who is worthless, just like I was when I was little? The involuntary admission revealed more than Sebastian intended. Zara immediately realized that he was repeating with his granddaughter the abuses he had suffered in his own childhood. Mr. Sebastian, I bet you were worth something when you were little. Sometimes adults say bad things to children because they themselves were hurt when they were little. You don't know anything, girl. Yes, I do. I know that when we hurt inside, sometimes we hurt other people without meaning to. But I also know that we can choose to stop hurting. Sebastian was silent for a long time, looking at Zara as if he were seeing a child for the first time in years. What do you want me to do? I want you to come see Louisa and tell her that you're sorry for being mean. And what if I don't know how to be different? Then we'll teach you, just like my Theodore taught me, that family is who cares, not who hurts. The conversation lasted another 2 hours. Gradually, Sebastian began to tell his own story. A childhood of abuse, years of hard work without affection, the repetition of patterns of violence that he didn't even realize he was perpetuating. "No one ever taught me another way," he said, finally. "It's not too late to learn," Zara replied with the wisdom of someone much older. 2 weeks later, something extraordinary happened. Sebastian Moreira appeared at the foundation, asking to see his granddaughter. He was no longer the intimidating man they had met at the farm. He was visibly nervous, carrying a small vase with sunflower seedlings. "I brought this for Luisa," he said to Sandra. "They're her mother's favorite flowers." The reunion between grandfather and granddaughter was carefully supervised but emotionally powerful. Sebastian asked Luisa for forgiveness for the assaults, explaining that he had been raised violently and did not know he was repeating the same mistakes. "Is Grandpa going to learn to be nice?" Luisa asked. "I'm going to try very hard, my granddaughter, very hard indeed." In the following months, Sebastian underwent therapy for anger management and participated in rehabilitation programs for domestic abusers. His farm was reformulated to offer decent working conditions, and he became a collaborator of the foundation, helping to identify other properties that exploited workers. "How did you know he could change?" Theodore asked Zara after Luisa was officially returned to her grandfather's care. "Because he cried when I talked about Luisa. People who cry for other people still have a good heart inside. And if you were wrong, then at least I would have tried. Grandma Betty always said that we should never stop trying to do good just because it might not work." The case of Sebastian and Luisa became one of the best known in the region, showing that even the most hardened abusers can change when they receive adequate help and are confronted with love instead of judgment. "Zara is creating a silent revolution," Dr. Miller observed during a visit to the foundation. "She's proving that compassion can be more powerful than punishment." "She always knew that," Theodore replied, watching his daughter teach other children. "To take care of the foundation's garden, we just needed to learn to listen." That night, while the family was having dinner at the mansion, Betty made an observation that deeply touched everyone's heart. "Zara, my granddaughter, when you were little, I always knew you were special. But I never imagined you would save so many families. I didn't save anyone, Grandma. I just helped people find each other. And that," Theodore said, "is the most beautiful way to save someone." Zhutu, the next and final chapter of the Mansour Santos family story, was about to be written, but it was already clear that it would be an ending full of hope and promises of new beginnings. 2 years had passed since Zara fell into that hole full of frogs, forever changing the lives of everyone around her. Now, at the age of 7, she had become a well-known figure throughout the region, not as a celebrity, but as a small force of nature that brought families together and transformed hearts. The Zara Foundation had grown beyond all expectations. What started as a local project now had partnerships with organizations from 3 states and had been responsible for reuniting more than 100 families separated by labor exploitation. "Mr. Theodore," Sandra said during the monthly foundation meeting, "we received an invitation from the state government to expand our program. They want to create similar foundations in other regions." "And what do you think?" Theodore asked, looking at Zara, who was sitting at the table as an official member of the foundation's advisory board. "I think it's a good idea," Zara replied thoughtfully, "but only if we can train people who really care. It's no use doing it just to do it." Zara's wisdom continued to surprise everyone. At the age of 7, she possessed an intuitive understanding of complex social issues that left experienced adults impressed. That week, the Mansour Santos mansion received an unexpected visit that would bring the most surprising revelation of all. Barbara Jenkins, Vivian's former lawyer, appeared at the door with a grave expression on her face. "Mr. Theodore, I need to talk to you urgently. It's about Vivian." "What happened? Is she okay?" Physically, yes, but there's something she asked me to tell you, something that will change everything you think about this story. Theodore, intrigued and worried, took Barbara into the office. Zara, with her natural curiosity, tried to follow, but was gently dismissed by Dulcie, who perceived the seriousness of the situation. "Mr. Theodore," the lawyer began, "Vivian is voluntarily admitted to a psychiatric clinic in San Francisco. During treatment, she revealed something she'd kept secret for years." "What kind of secret?" "About Zara's true identity." Theodore felt the blood run cold in his veins. "What do you mean, true identity?" Barbara took a deep breath before continuing. 10 years ago, Vivian had a pregnancy that she hid from everyone, including you. The child was born prematurely and had serious complications. The doctors said she wouldn't survive. Vivian had a child of mine, a daughter, who, according to medical records, passed away 3 days after birth. Theodore stood up from the chair, walking to the window. "Why didn't she ever tell me?" "Because she couldn't bear the pain of the loss. She pretended it never happened. But for years, she suffered from the guilt and sadness of having lost a daughter." "And what does this have to do with Zara?" "Mr. Theodore, when Zara came to your house, Vivian immediately realized that she was almost the same age as her. A daughter would have been, and there was something else." The lawyer took a folder from her briefcase and placed it on the table. "These are the documents that Vivian gave me. Medical records, certificates, DNA tests that she secretly had done." Theodore opened the folder with trembling hands, finding documents he couldn't fully understand. "What do they mean?" "It means there was a mistake at the hospital. The child they said had died didn't die. She was incorrectly registered as deceased and given up for illegal adoption." "Are you saying that—" "I'm saying that Zara Santos is actually Zara Mansour. She is your biological daughter with Vivian." The silence that followed was deafening. Theodore sat heavily in the chair, trying to process a revelation that completely changed everything he believed about his life. How did Vivian find out about this? She always suspected it from the first day. The physical resemblance, the date of birth, small details that only a mother would notice. But she didn't want to believe it, because it would mean she had rejected her own daughter for all these months. And Isadora, Betty, how do they fit into this? Isadora worked briefly as a cleaner at the hospital where Zara was born. When she discovered that a child had been illegally abandoned, she took her home and raised her as a daughter, not knowing that she was saving the daughter of her former boss. The pieces of an impossible puzzle began to fit together in Theodore's mind. The intercepted letter from Isadora wasn't from a former employee asking for work. It was from the woman who had raised his own daughter, asking for help to support her. Why is Vivian telling me this now? Because she can't live with the weight of the truth anymore, and because she believes Zara deserves to know who she really is. Theodore spent the next few hours reading and rereading the documents, checking dates, analyzing DNA tests that unequivocally confirmed that Zara was his biological daughter. The irony was devastating. He had fought to adopt a child who was already his by right. When Zara returned from the garden for dinner, she found Theodore sitting in the living room with an expression she had never seen before. "What happened?" she asked, approaching carefully. "Zara, I need to tell you something very important, something that will change how you understand our family." "Is it about Aunt Vivian?" "It's about you, about who you really are." Theodore explained carefully, using words that a 7-year-old could understand, the whole truth about her birth, about the mistake at the hospital, about how Isadora had found her and raised her with love, and about how fate had conspired to bring her back home. Zara listened to everything in silence, her big eyes processing information that was too complex for any child. "So Isadora isn't my real mum?" she asked finally. Isadora is your mum by heart. She raised you, loved you, took care of you when I didn't know you existed. And Aunt Vivian is my blood mom. Yes. And you're my blood dad? I am. Zara was quiet for a long time, playing with the small plants she always carried in her pockets. Theodore, can I ask you a question? Sure. Does this change anything? How so? Am I still your daughter? Is Isadora still my mom? Is Grandma Betty still my grandma? Is Dulcie still part of our family? Of course, yes. None of that changes. Then it's okay. We just found out that our family is even more special than we thought. The simplicity with which Zara accepted the revelation deeply touched Theodore's heart. For her, family had always been about love and choice, not about blood or documents. Do you want to meet Vivian as your biological mother? He asked. Zara thought carefully. Yes, I do. But she needs to understand that I already have a mom. Isadora raised me when no one else could. That doesn't change. A week later, Vivian returned from San Francisco for a carefully prepared meeting with Zara. She was a transformed woman, more fragile physically, but with an honesty in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Hi, Zara, she said timidly when they met in the mansion's garden. Hi, Aunt Vivian, or Mom Vivian. You can call me whatever you feel most comfortable with. Can I call you Mom Vivian? Because I have Mom Isadora too, and I want both of you to know that you're important. Yes, you can. They talked for hours. Vivian explaining her journey of discovery and regret, Zara sharing her simple philosophy about family and forgiveness. Do you forgive me for rejecting you when I didn't know you were my daughter? Vivian asked. You were scared and sad. People do bad things when they're scared and sad, but now you're not anymore, so it's okay. How can you be so wise? Grandma Betty always said that suffering teaches, but love heals. I suffered a little, but I received a lot of love, so I learned both things. That night, for the first time in years, the Manso Santos family was truly complete. Theodore, Zara, Isadora, Betty, Dulce, and now Vivian, a family built not by chance, but by a series of small and large miracles that proved that love always finds a way. Theodore, Zara said before going to sleep, do you think all this happened because of the frogs? How so? If you hadn't fallen into the hole with the frogs, you never would have found me. If you hadn't found me, you never would have discovered that I was your daughter. The frogs brought us together. Theodore smiled, remembering his old phobia and how it had completely disappeared. Maybe the frogs are wiser than we think. Or maybe, Zara said with her infinite wisdom, fate uses the things we're most afraid of to give us what we need most. And so, in a small town in West Virginia, an impossible family proved that there is nothing more powerful than love when it decides to change the world, one person at a time, starting with a courageous girl who transformed fear into courage, loneliness into family, and despair into hope. The Zara Foundation continued to grow. Harmony Creek became a national example of social inclusion, and little Zara Santos Mansour continued her mission to reunite families, knowing now that she herself was the greatest example that miracles happen when we least expect them, in the most unlikely places, through the most improbable people. And every time she saw frogs in her garden, she smiled and thanked them for having been responsible for bringing together a family that fate had scattered around the world, but that love managed to reunite again. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please comment. Your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.